Hey guys, welcome to my Temporal talk. My name is Bruce Hubbard. I've been a software developer for about 22 years. I currently work at Venly, which was a startup in the Cincinnati area that got bought by Workday. In my 22 years, have used a variety of frameworks, Java, .NET, Rails, Django, Node, but JavaScript has always been consistent across all of them and has always been my love. I'm from the Cincinnati area. I have 5 kids. 2 of them are in this audience right now because they might have computer science careers in front of them. All right. So you guys actually sat and willingly walked in this room with the intention of hearing somebody ramble on about dates in JavaScript for 45 minutes. Woo! Yeah. That means you're either new to handling dates and you're unaware of the horrors that await you, or you're hoping somebody's figured them out. So here's a brief summary of what we're going to talk about. We're going to do a very brief history of JavaScript dates. We're going to talk about quirks with dates and third-party date libraries. We're going to do an intro to Temporal, and then the 4th section will be, can I use this in production? So if you're pretty familiar with Temporal, this is the part where I'm going to warn you, you're not going to get a ton out of the first like 2/3 of the talk. Like if you're pretty familiar with the API, you may get a lot out of the last section because we're actually actively using Temporal in production right now at Venly. But I will not be offended if you skip this presentation and watch it on YouTube later and just watch the last 10 minutes. So you're not going to offend me. So let's go over a brief history of JavaScript dates. Yeah, that was a trick. They've always sucked. The end. So I pulled this quote from MDN. It says, when JavaScript was created in 1995, the date object was copied from Java's early flawed java.util.date implementation. Java replaced this implementation in 1997, so 2 years later, but JavaScript is stuck with the same API for almost 30 years, despite known problems. What my kids would say to that is, oof. So the problem is backwards compatibility, right? Once something is a standard in JavaScript, it's hard to undo it. If you make a breaking change, you may take down half of the sites on the internet. So you can't really break. You kind of gotta, go to the side, and that's what Temporal is kind of doing. We'll see here in a second. So let's talk about why date sucks. So I'm going to poll the audience here, and I know I can't see the other 2 theaters, but which of these 2 statements print what you think it's going to print, which is January 1st, 2025. So the top one is an ISO formatted date string, and the second one is a slash notation. So hands up if you think the top one is going to print the correct date. And the people in the other theaters, you just please use your hand, but keep yourself honest. Okay, now who thinks the second one is going to print the correct date? Who thinks both? So the answer is the top one, yeah, it depends. Michael's right. So I should have said in Ohio, right? In Ohio, if you're east of the UTC date line, you're probably going to get the same date, and it's going to work. Yeah, but since we are west of the UTC line, that you get an off by 1 error. So I've ran all these in Node. The problem is date is not actually a date, right? I was using it like a date, kind of tricking you guys, but it's actually a date time, or more specifically, it is an instant in time. So it represents some exact time in history. So when you actually give it the ISO date, it fills in all the time stuff with zeros, including like the UTC offset. So then when we go display it, it actually, since we're -4 from UTC, it actually pulls that date time back 4 hours and then displays an off by 1 date. So that kind of sucks. So here's another example. I'm not going to pull the audience because this one's weird. So if you do new date and you pass null, do you really expect to get, you technically get January 1st, 1970, but in my case, since we're, again, west of the UTC line, you get December 31st, 1969. This leads to some really weird bugs, and I've seen those bugs in production on like, timesheet, stuff. So, yeah. So here's another one of my favorites. If you, and I did not use the 1st of the month this time, it's the 2nd of the month, it's today's date, so you know you're going to get May. But if you call .getMonth, it will return 4, not 5. You would expect 5 because it's the 5th month, but it's actually 0-based. And I don't know. This one's always bothered me because I'm okay with 0-base indexes, but this one always bugged me because when I see 4, I think April, not May. I think that was kind of a dumb decision. But that's fine. You know, date's broken. We have third-party libraries. Well, at Vinley, we were a startup, so at one point we had Moment, we had date fns 1, we had date fns 2, and we were like, okay, let's upgrade, let's go date fns 3. So, by the way, on the right-hand side, it's possible to use multiple versions of the same package in package.json. That's how, if you ever don't know that. So these are some code. So the top one is date fns 1. When we ran something like a date string coming from an API, right? These are hard-coded, but pretend like this is a variable coming from an API. In version 1, you'd get the correct date. In version 2, we would pass the ISO dated string. And yeah, version 2, they decided to get rid of the string arguments. You have to actually parse it into a date and then pass it in. So that was fun. And then version 3, which we went to, if you pass the exact same thing you did for version 1, you get that off by 1 date again. So, and this is using ISO strings, not the slash formats or anything. So this wrecked us because we went all in on date fns 3, and then all of a sudden we kept hitting these off by 1 day errors, which when you're dealing with money and people's time, that's a big deal. So yeah, oof, that sucked. So temporal to the rescue, question mark? So I'm going to talk about our journey. Well, first I'm going to go through the API, and then at the end I'm going to talk about our journey in temporal. So what is temporal? It's an upcoming JavaScript standard for handling dates and times. So it is an actual addition to the JavaScript language. It's going to add a new global variable called temporal. And then it uses ISO strings only. So you saw some examples where I was using slash dates. You can't use those with temporal. It has to be an ISO formatted string. So if you don't know ISO formatted strings, they basically look like this. I'm sure if you've been developing for any length of time and dealt with dates, you've seen these. You know, the first kind of portions are the date, and then a T that separates the date and the time, and then a time component. Sometimes these can have milliseconds on it also. And then that last bit where you just see Z, that is the UTC offset. And sometimes instead of seeing Z, you'll see things like this. You'll see like plus, 00 or -4. When I first started dealing with these formats, I thought that was the time zone, but it's actually not the time zone. You can kind of imply the time zone, but like here in Ohio, sometimes we're -4 and sometimes we're -5, depending on daylight savings time. And since not all states do daylight savings time, sometimes it crosses where like Arizona, sometimes it's in mountain time, sometimes it's in California time. So these are not time zones, these are offsets to UTC. So UTC is like a magical, it's like the nuclear clock for dates and times across the world. It's a standard. And so any moment in time is usually measured in UTC and then with an offset. So these 4 right here are actually all the same instant in time. Yep, so instead of 20, 16, it's -4. So temporal uses ISO formatted strings, but there are a couple add-ons to ISO formatted strings. And I hadn't seen these until we started looking at temporal. So the orange box is actually a time zone extension. So I was like, wait a minute, I thought we had time zones. And then I'm like, oh, that's actually an offset. This orange box is not even really a time zone. It's like a time area. I forget what they call them, like time tags or something, where, and you'll see examples, like for Eastern time, you can use America/New York. Temporal, and you kind of see at the bottom, instead of 1 date type, you get 7 types now. So there's a plain month day, there's a plain year month, plain date, plain time, plain date time, an instant, and a zone date time. So imagine that date object was trying to do the job of really all 7 of these, when actually it's a lot more complicated. So now we have 7 different types to deal with. Kind of ignore the red box because temporal supports multiple calendar systems, but we're only going to be talking about like Gregorian slash, which is pretty similar to ISO 8601. So I'm not dealing with any alternative calendars or anything in this talk, but Temporal should hypothetically support it. I basically took that slide and rearranged it so you can kind of see, what bits of the ISO formatted string each type uses. So first, we're gonna do a deep dive into one of the types, and then I picked instant because it's pretty similar to what you probably have already seen. That's the second to bottom. So each of these types has quirks. We'll talk about the quirks and why they're there. But yeah, we're going to talk about instant because it's similar to date. Okay, things you might want to do with a date. You might want to actually instantiate it. So temporal.instant is a little weird with the constructor because it only takes a big int. So you probably were expecting ISO string. We'll get to that here in a second. So it actually takes epoch nanoseconds. I don't really foresee myself using this constructor very often. The next slide is way more helpful, but I did note that if you pass in like a normal int instead of a big int, it actually throws an error. And then, so this one is actually the one that probably most people will use from. So like you would expect the constructor, basically you pass it a string and you get an object back. In this case, we're passing it actual, ISO formatted date strings like you saw. The last instance is actually, you can kind of clone these objects. So they're immutable. All the methods that you call will return you a new instance instead of editing the existing instance. But if you need to like clone one, that bottom one is what you want. So other things that you might want to do with a date is you might want to compare it to another date. So on this slide, I'll let you guys read it for a second. I have 3 dates, or 3 instants, right? 2 of them are the same, one of them is later. Just like any JavaScript object, if you use triple equals on it, since it is an object, it's going to be false unless they are literally the same object in memory, even though the first 2 are the same. So you have to use dot equals. And then the bottom one shows you that there's a static method on all 7 of these new types called compare, and you can pass it into objects, and it will return you either 0 if it's the same, or less than 0 or greater than 0 if it's less than or equal, or less than or greater than. So other things that you might want to do with dates is you might want to know, okay, I have 2 dates. How much time is in between? There's something built in the temporal for that. There's 2 methods. One's called until and one's called since, and they're kind of mirror images of each other. So I have an example here, start of the moon mission, end of the moon mission, and you could say start of moon mission dot until end of moon mission, and it will return you a duration object, which has a bunch of properties like days, hours, minutes, seconds. So it will return you back exactly how much time is in between these two instants. Okay, another thing you might want to do with dates is you might want to add stuff to them or subtract. So as you would expect, you can if you have one, you can call .add. In this case, it takes an object with a bunch of properties. So for instant, you can add seconds, minutes, and hours. And then it will return you a new instant that actually does the adding, right? Or has the new value. Now you may have saw the comment above that line and made this face, like years, months, weeks, and days must be 0. Like, why? That's weird. So this is one of these quirks that I was talking about. When I kind of made the same face, and then I found this in the docs. It says the years, months, weeks, and days fields of duration must be 0. Temporal.instant is independent of time zones and calendars. And so years, months, weeks, and days may be different lengths depending on which calendar or time zone they're reckoned in. This makes an addition with those units ambiguous. To add those units, convert temporal.instant to a temporal.zone date time by specifying the desired calendar and time zone, add the duration, and then convert it back. So when I read that, I was like, oh, I'm in danger here. I'm like, it's easy though, right? Like if you have a day and then you add a day, it's just 24 hours, right? Like today at 3 o'clock plus 1 day is tomorrow at 3 o'clock, right? I'm like, so this must be some weird quirk with some other calendars. And then it dawned on me, oh no, it's actually our calendar that does this. It's because of things like daylight savings time. So if you took the same example and did March 8th of this year, and you were in Ohio, there was actually only 23 hours in that day, not 24. But that's not the case everywhere in the world. And so this object called instant is completely, it does not know what time zone you're talking about. It is just an instant in time, right? That's why it's called instant. So since it doesn't know where you are, you can't add a day, because a day could be a different length. So this is a quirk, I call it, but it's actually there to save you from bugs. All right, so in order to actually convert, to add days to an instant, you have to actually convert it to a zone date time, which if you remember from the graph I showed you, is the long one at the bottom. So it adds that time zone extension and calendar extension. So here's an example. So if you have an instant, in this case, it's the same, daylight savings day, right? March 8th at 3 o'clock. So I can convert it to a zone date time by telling it what time zone I'm in this case, America/New York. And then I can add a day, because now it knows where I am in the world and, how many hours were in that day. I can call to locale string, and hey, look, yeah, it is the next day at 3 o'clock. And then if I ran an until, you can see, yeah, it actually is 23 hours in length. So this is just a little quirk I wanted you guys to know about. All right, so let's talk about some more methods that you will see on all 7 temporal objects types. So another one is toString. So you've obviously seen toString on a lot of things. toString will give you the ISO formatted string back for whatever type you're on. So for an instant, that's what it'll look like. You can pass it in, for instant, you can pass in time zone, and it'll actually give you the offset for that time zone. Again, it doesn't matter because it should be identical. And it also, all 7 types have .to JSON, which basically does the same thing, but it makes it play nicely with JSON.stringify. All 7 types have a to locale string, which will give you back a nice readable version of that of the value. Again, with this one, so like I have an instant here which represents today at 3 o'clock, which is when this talk started. So if you call that to locale string, you get 5/2/2025, 3 p.m. It takes a second parameter. We're going to ignore that first parameter for now. We'll get back to it. The second parameter is an options object. One of those options is time zone. So if you have a date and a time, you can actually pass it the time zone you want to display it in, and it will adjust that time correctly depending on, all the daylight savings times and stuff like that. So that second object also has a couple utility type methods. One of them is date style. So date style are kind of like pre-built options that you can use for displaying dates. So there's full, long, medium, and short. You can kind of see what they do over there. The full kind of gives you a lot. I don't know if I've ever seen dates really display like that, but long and medium and short are pretty useful. But if you don't like the pre-built ones, there are additional flags that you can pass in for weekday, month, and day. So the first 2, if you notice, I didn't put a year, and so therefore it doesn't display it. So anything, you can basically put in what you want it to display, and it'll figure it out. The last one I added year. In each of those fields, there are a couple values you can use, like long or numeric, depending on if you want it written out or you just want the numeric value. So just like date style, there is an equivalent time style. So again, there's full, long, medium, and short. The full, again, looks a little bit useless, but the long, medium, and short look useful. I'll get to here in a second. And then the bottom example show that you can actually pass in individual flags instead of using those pre-built styles. In my case, the second from the bottom I told it to use a 2-digit hour, which will force it to use the 2 digits instead of 1 digit. And then the bottom one, I told it to use a 24-hour clock, so like military time. So .to locale string is so important it actually gets 4 slides. So now we're going to talk about that first parameter. So the first parameter is actually the locale. I mean, it's called .to locale string. So if you call it with no parameters, it reads the locale and the time zone off of whoever's machine is currently using it. So in my case, I'm in Ohio, and then my locale is English US, so it displays my dates like that. The second example shows that if you want to hard code it, like all dates and times to English US, you could just pass that, and it will hard code them no matter where your users are and what locale they are. That sounds a little dumb. I don't know if I would do that, but you can. But same thing if you did English Great Britain or Germany, those are the third and fourth examples. You'll notice that you get a nicely formatted date and time for those locales. And just like you saw on the previous slides, you can kind of combine that first one with the second options object, and you get really nicely displayed dates for free. It'll be in the browser, right? This to locale string. So nice internationalization here. So this method is so important it actually gets 5 slides. And that's because I actually wanted to mention that this is actually available right now. Some of you may have been looking at that and going, that looks super familiar. That's because it actually is already there in the browser on the date object. And so you really shouldn't be doing things like .format with a hard-coded format string. Stuff like that is pretty much tech debt. Like you're instantly adding tech debt. You should not be doing that. You should be using some kind of localization software unless you know for a fact your company is never going to break out of the US. Yep. So yeah, I have an example here, new date, and you can actually do the same thing, .to locale string on date. So you can use that right now, but it will also be built into all these temporal objects. Fun fact, you can actually use it on numbers also. So if you have like the number 1000, you can actually put 1000 in parentheses and say .to locale string, and you can format numbers with, some locales use commas, some use dots, so you can use them on numbers too. Okay, so we talked about instant. Now we're going to talk about plain date. Plain date is just like the first several characters of these ISO dates, date strings. So just like we saw with instant, you might want to construct one of these. And so there's a constructor, but instead of taking nanoseconds, it takes year, month, and day, just like what you would expect a plain date to use. Oh, actually, let me flip back because I forgot to mention, you see the word plain on all these, the first 5. Plain means they have no concept really of time zones. So when we're going to look at plain date, that date is regardless, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, that's your date. So whatever your birthday is, that's your birthday for the entire day, no matter where you are in the world. That's what a plain date is. So yeah, you might want to construct these. So there's the constructor. You can use .from. You can now on this one you can use .from with like an options object if you wanted to pass it that way. So do you remember this that we saw earlier? Well, guess what? If you use so again we were off by 1 day, right? Now if you use temporal.planeDate and do the same thing, hey, look at that. You actually have the correct date. Yay! All right, let's talk about some quirks. So yeah, what do you guys think this is going to do? So you might think, okay, this is going to return you back January 31st, 2021. Well, the answer is it's just going to error out. So if you pass this in to plain date, you'll actually get an error. And that is because the format of that ISO string represents an instant in time, if you remember. Depending on where you are in the world, that instant could be that day. It could be the day before. It could be the day after. It's the same reason why the date constructor was off by 1. So if you want to use plain date, you cannot pass an instant. They're incompatible due to time zones. Now you can pass, so if you did the little square box and told it what time zone this is, it'll accept it, and that's good to go. But you can't use the instant. I just wanted to point that out because that's one of the most common date formats that you see out there. Here's another quirk. So if you remember, if you did a new date and you passed in null, you got a date in 1970. If you pass in null to from, it's going to error out, which I think I would rather it error out than give me 1970. I don't know about you guys. I would much rather deal with the nulls than, yeah, get 1970. 1970 is stupid. I don't know who decided that, but we've been dealing with it for 30 years. So I wanted to point these out because they're quirks, but they're actually quirks that are there to kind of try to save you from bugs. There's an additional method that I wanted to point out called with. This is if you just want to kind of, if you have a plain date and you want to swap out one field, and it has kind of logic to overflow properly. So in this case, I did January 25th, and I said with days 40. So it doesn't actually set the days to 40 because there's only 31 days in January. But as you can see from the comment, it actually will flip it to January 31st. There is an additional flag if you don't want that behavior called overflow reject, where then if you try to pass in too many days to that month, then it'll error out. That's up to you. All right, so just like we saw with instant plain dates, you can add things to them, right? In this case, we can actually add days and months because there's no ambiguity for plain date because it doesn't care about time zones at all. So a day is a day, right? There is no ambiguity in how many hours. We're not even dealing with time at all. We're just dealing with the date, which thank God, the time stuff has been killing us for 30 years. Now we actually have just dates. So we can add months and days and years, or not years, yeah, years to this one. I did want to point out though that second line, you can pass multiple things to this, but you got to really think about the ordering of things because if you're on January 25th, if you were to add 7 days, that would put you on February 1st, and then you add a month, you'd be on March 1st. But if you actually did it the other way around and added a month first, then you'd be on February 25th, and then you added 7 days, you'd actually be on March 4th. So if you're going to try to do this with multiple days and months at the same time, I would chain them like I did on the bottom two. Just wanted to point that out because I thought that was weird. I don't know if it actually should allow you to do that. Maybe the API will change. So I wanted to point out that these objects have properties. So everything that you would want in a plain date, it has obviously the things you passed in, but you also can get the day of the week. You can get how many days are in that month. It'll tell you whether it's in leap year. Lots of useful stuff. We're not going to go into the other 5. We kind of went a little bit into 2 of these, but again, if you look at this stuff, it's very useful. All right. Now the big question. That's nice. This is awesome. Can I actually use it? So if you look at can I use, the answer is a quick no. It is not built in any of the browsers currently except for Firefox, and even then it's only the nightly build. But if you've been a web developer for long enough, you're like, oh, there's a polyfill, and there is. We'll get to it. But I wanted to talk about where Temporal is in the TC39 process. So if you're unfamiliar with the TC39 process, this is how new features get added to the JavaScript language. So they kind of start out as a proposal. It goes through a lot of stuff. Temporal is currently at stage 3, where the star is. And that means the proposal has been recommended for implementation by browsers and Node and stuff. No changes to the proposals are expected, but some necessary changes may occur due to web incompatibilities or feedback from production-grade implementations. Again, browsers may implement this and say, hey, that doesn't work, something needs to change. By the time it hits stage 4, we're good to go. You can pretty much use it. It should be in most of the browsers. But currently, we're stuck in stage 3. So we'll talk a little about the benefits. You guys have seen the API. The API is pretty easy to use. I've been pretty happy with it. I've seen some quirks. Most of the quirks are there, though, to save you from bugs. Once it once it clears stage 4 and it gets built into the browsers, hey, you get it for free, right? It's kind of like the date object. It won't count towards your bundle budgets. It's probably going to have like super optimized code that will run super fast, and it will be an industry standard. So I have a feeling that it's going to take off like crazy once it's fully baked in. Another benefit is you get type safety. So we saw those 7 different types. You can do things like this. If you're using like React or something, right? You can say, hey, my component takes a plain date. No longer do you like have to pass in a string and pray that it's the correct format, or take a date where you're like, okay, did you give me time? Like, am I going to be off by 1? Hey, you can say, I take a plain date, and that's pretty obvious what you want. So us at Vinley, we looked at this stuff. I told you about like date FNs3 kind of wrecked us. So we were kind of looking, okay, is there something better? We started looking at other libraries, and when we started looking at Temporal, I don't know, hopefully you guys can, it doesn't come off too well, but that banner at the top, when we started looking at the APIs and everything, that banner was up there, and it's like, hey, this is experimental, try it, but don't use it in production. Yeah, we decided to use it anyway, but that was a little scary seeing that, and it's like, oh no. But if you go to the same site right now, that scary banner's gone, and it's replaced by, hey, here's some stuff. So this is probably the most important slide in the entire slide deck. This is how you will, if you want to use Temporal, you can use it right now using these 2 things. So the risk with Temporal is, hey, if I start to use and I'm using this polyfill, by the way, that's the polyfill, that's the most widely like used one right now. I recommend you using that one. The risk is, hey, if I'm using the polyfill and some of these browsers start implementing Temporal, you could have an API difference, right? Like you could have difference. So we were thinking about that, and we're like, man, that really sucks, because we don't want like random bugs like, oh, Firefox implemented this, now we're getting errors on our timesheet stuff. So what we actually did is we went into ESLint and turned the Temporal as a global object off. So none of our developers can actually use Temporal from the global namespace. That forces them to import it from the polyfill. So effectively, we're using the polyfill as a third-party library right now. That happens to be that library implements Temporal, right? And then once Temporal's in a good state, it's built into the browsers, we can just remove this. We can remove the imports, we can remove the ESLint restriction in one PR, and we're good to go. But right now, you could use this pretty risk-free if you do these 2 things. I want to talk about a couple other things that we dealt with when we implemented it. We use React Date Picker, and I'm sure a lot of date pickers do this, but they give you a date back. Even though React Date Picker, you can pick like a month and a year, you might not even be, and it actually has time, right? Like it has all these different kinds of pickers you can do, but it mostly just gives you a date back. So we wrote little shims around most of that stuff that basically does all the little converting from a date into the actual temporal objects. That way our developers can just use this date picker, so in this case a plain date picker, without having to deal with dates. So they can just pick up this this component and then implement on change, and on their on change they'll get a plain date object. It's a little more complicated than this. This is a very simplified example because you have to deal with values, max, min, and stuff like that. But it wasn't too bad. So we actually have several. We have plain date picker. We have year month picker. We have ranges. We have time pickers. So we basically wrote shims around all these things. So if you're doing this in production, another place that you need to be careful on is serializing. If you're using just JSON.stringify, it's going to work fine. Since it implements .to JSON, it's fine. We, though, are using a library called QS, and when we went to serialize this, you got nothing. And that's because QS basically says, hey, this thing's an object. Let me start seeing if it has properties that can be serialized. And yeah, I didn't like it, so you got nothing. So we had a couple bugs, in the first little test cases we were doing. We had to write a little shim around QS that basically said, hey, if this is a temporal object, do the right thing. Also, obviously with serializing, with deserializing, you're probably already doing this with dates. If coming back from your APIs, you're probably getting strings. When you parse those, you need to parse them into the correct objects. So, final thoughts. We at Venly have been using this in production now for 7 months. So we merged the polyfill, we made all this stuff available to all of our developers, and they've been super happy with it. So we get compliments on it all the time. It's way, way better than dealing with dates. Yep. No off by 1 bugs. Hey. Some of the quirks are irritating, but they are saving you from bugs. So in my opinion, as soon as this hits stage 4 and becomes widespread, the date object is dead. Like, it's dead. Anything you have that deals with date right now is dead. Like, it's dead code. It's obsolete at this point. It's going to go the way of var. So var got replaced by let and const. Date is going to get replaced by all this stuff. So if you want to get ahead of it, my recommendation is you should start using it right now. So that's my talk. So I'm Bruce Hubbard. Again, I'll post these slides up to the Discord. The QR code is actually to the docs that we use all the time. Has fantastic docs. It's very well documented. Like, even the things where you're like, what the heck are you thinking? Like, they usually put very good verbiage as to why they made those decisions. So that's my talk. Anybody have any questions? Go for it.
Just elaborate on like constants for frequently used variables for time zones.
That's a great question. That would be very nice. I don't know if it does. I haven't seen it.
Could you repeat the question for people?
Oh, yeah. Yep, sorry. The question was whether it has built-in constants for all the like time zones and other like strings that you've seen me use. I don't know if it does. That's a very good question. I'll have to look at it. I don't think it does because I haven't seen it in the docs, and I'm pretty sure they would call it out. But yeah, that's a great question. Any other questions? Are there any questions in Discord?
Trying to pull that up.
Okay. All right. Well, if anybody wants to talk about Temporal or they have any questions after the talk here, I'll be out in the hall. So you feel free to grab me and talk if you want, but that's Temporal. Thanks.